Welcome, Cynthia. Thank you for being here. You prefer I call you Cindy, right? Or
You can honestly call me either one. You can even mix and match it.
okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. So I'm Adriana. I'm a second year MFA in poetry. Today is February 24th, 2026. We are at McKenna Hall conducting another oral history interview for the project, or another interview in the project of oral history interviews that Letras, Latinas has run for over 20 years, I think, or almost 20 years. It's a literary initiative run by Francisco Aragon, housed in the Institute of Latino Studies. And just to give a little introduction of who Cynthia Cruz is, she is currently a visiting professor of poetry for the creative writing program here, and is the author of 8 collections of poems, 2 collections of critical essays, and 1 novella. 2 new collections of poems are forthcoming or just released. Sweet Repetition, which just came out in 2025 from the University of Chicago Press, and you have Twilight forthcoming with 4-Way Books this year. And Cruz is also the recipient of fellowships from the Yarrow and MacDowell Colony, as well as a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University and a Guggenheim Fellowship. And Hotel Oblivion was a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Award and the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. And you have a BA in English Literature and an MFA in Poetry, an MFA in Art Writing, an MA in German Language and Literature, and you're working on, or how?
I finished in August, the PhD.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah,
a PhD at the European Graduate School focused on Hegel and madness. So, just so impressive and so much to talk about. It's an honor to be interviewing you again after you were here almost 10 years ago, interviewed by another MFA student, Zach. And back then you had only, I think, published 4 poetry books, which was Ruin, Glimmering Room, Wunderkammer, and How the End Begins. And so for this interview, I read some of your more recent works, or recent since then, and also looked at this anthology that you compiled and edited called Other Music's New Latina Poetry, which I will touch on in a moment. And I just, to apologize in advance that we won't cover everything that I wish we could cover. So I guess I'll begin with kind of a question about like then and now, kind of a career question. You talked about, in the previous interview with Zach, you talked about being the first in your family to go through higher education and how you felt you were a bit late in the game and playing catch up. And do you still see it that way, as you were late, or do you see maybe some benefits now of having arrived late? And like almost 10 years down the road, what has changed? How would you summarize like these last 10 years in terms of your career?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, for interviewing me, and for doing all the hard work preparing. It's a good question. As I said before we began the interview, it's just so good for me to think about the last 10 years because I don't sort of think like that. I'm always thinking of the future, and I never think about like what has happened. So it's good. So I want to clarify, too, that my father, so he was a field worker. He was one of 13. His parents were Mexican immigrants from Chihuahua, Mexico, and he was unable to finish grammar school. I think it's important just to point out, like, it's not high school. Like, he could not finish grammar school because he had to work, on a tractor. And my mother, I didn't know. I thought she finished high school, but she recently told me, and this has to do with the shame, right, of class, that she did not finish high school either. So really, I'm coming from just like the bottom in terms of like access, right? Access to elite institutions and things like that. I don't mean that in a derogatory term. My parents are, they're very smart. Compassionate people. But then the other thing I wanted to say was, I forgot. Just hold on, it's going to come back because you asked these questions. No, I do. I think every day I think about how I'm behind. So I just got a PhD in philosophy, and it's late. I mean, it's quite late to be doing that. And so there's always this, like, I'm aware of the fact that I've published, I think it's because of Sweet Repetition, like 9 books of poetry and novella, and like all of this stuff I am aware. I'm not, and I'm grateful for it, for sure. But I also really do feel like I'm always like 15, 20 years behind. And there was something else I wanted to say about that. And I was thinking about this before, that, so, you know, growing up the way I did in a working poor background. Neither of my parents had finished high school. My father didn't finish grammar school, so college was not an option. Like, it wasn't like it's not an option. It was not on the horizon, and that's something I think a lot about, and that's sort of what I mean about being behind, is that, so philosophy obviously was not, I mean, no one in my family, we didn't have books. I mean, we had some books, but they were like fairy tale books. So poetry, there was no poetry. My parents, you know, didn't and do not read poetry. And certainly did not have access to philosophy. So that's how it's slow. So, you know, one doesn't know until one comes up against that knowledge, and then you realize it. And so that's how it's been. It's been like, I didn't know about my horizons or what was there until I bumped up against them. And that's why also my education background is so sort of eclectic and strange, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I wanted to write, my husband is an abstract painter, so I wanted to figure out how to articulate this language. So I went to do the SVA art writing program, and then when I got there, I started writing about German female writers in silence, and I realized, wait, that's not this, that's something else. So I was going to get a PhD in German language and literature, and then when I was there, I realized I would be limited to only writing about literature, and I wanted to write about the world. But see, each thing I didn't know until I got there, and that's how it's taken so long. And so there are so many people, most of the people I come in contact with were exposed, you know, their parents taught at the university, or, you know, they were already in this kind of milieu, so they already knew quite young that they wanted to be a philosopher or they wanted to be a poet, and so then they had this kind of access. And so that's what I mean when I say that, and I think it is true, and it's sort of heartbreaking, I guess. So it's like this bittersweet experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out, because I actually have that background where my family was kind of in arts, culture, and like intellectual things like philosophy, but I also relate to feeling behind and to not knowing exactly, like, to having some kind of crisis in my case that still prevented me from being able to meet those milestones where it was expected, and then the shame of like that knowledge that it should be easier for me, and that makes it kind of even worse. But I actually find it really inspiring to see like other people, for whatever reason, kind of doing things late, because as someone who's doing their MFA in their 30s, like, it shows me that we don't all maybe have to adapt to those timelines of capitalism, and that there's a lot of other reasons why people can fall behind.
Right.
And I'm sure, like, we could go off on that whole tangent, but unless you have something to add, I wanted to segue into the anthology, because precisely in the introduction to this anthology of Latina poetry, you talk about like the diverse backgrounds of Latina women specifically, but I think that applies for like the Latinx community in general. You talk about it as an identity that is like that inhabits this in-betweenness, and that's something that also is very present just in your poetry in general. And I really appreciated how this anthology makes space for that. I'm certainly also not a tradition, like, if that is a thing, like, but I don't have I don't tick all the boxes of what is supposed to be like the typical Latina characteristics. But I wanted to ask how, also first I wanted to read a little poem from Back to the Woods that I think, it doesn't mention Latinidad at all, but it features your dad, and it explores the topic of class. This poem called Alchemy. And you talk about how when I was a child, well, not assuming that it's autobiographical, but when I was a child, father would take me with him on the road. We'd sit along the crimson leather seats of the booths in the quiet diners of highway truck stops, eating nothing, drinking waters and root beer. His face was not his face, it was the face of his father and his father's father. Years of labor pressed like a miracle into the shimmering oracle of his dark countenance, warped and damaged like a map held underwater for centuries. We never spoke. He was like a god to me. And while apart from being a really beautiful and evocative poem, I think it's really interesting how you touch like on the effects of class in the body and also the lineage of fathers all kind of carrying this burden of labor. And so I'm wondering about like the relationship between class and Latinidad for you, and if you find that you can't explore these identities of like class, Latinidad, and or like being a woman, like do you explore them together and inseparably from each other? And just how do you tend to experience them and also, I guess, explore them in your poetry?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, I mean, it would be a symposium, I guess, if I were to sort of, there's just so much. So, I mean, that book for me is a, think of the word, what is it? It's, I can't think of the word. But I wrote that, I put together that compilation because I was very, very angry. So I won't get specific because I don't want to be like that. But my experience has been in terms of trying to. So my father's Mexican American, and his parents. His father was indigenous, and his mother was Spanish Mexican. You know, obviously Mexico was colonized, so you know there is that mix all throughout, right? So. So my experience. So my mom's German, and so you know I'm half Mexican American, half German, and that's just one of the many components of my background. But early on in college, when I tried to join, I forgot the name of the group of the Latina group on campus. I literally was not allowed in, and my understanding was because the way I looked, which is just it's racist, right? Because actually, I look like my grandmother on my father's side because she's Spanish, not the German. And I mean, again, I could go on forever about this. My mother is. Fully German, and she's short with dark hair and hazel eyes. So like this kind of Aryan idea is implicitly, it's racist, right? And so that was my first experience of sort of trying to join this community. And then another experience was, I'm just going to try to like house it in a different way. It's just this idea that there's sort of, in the United States, there's one sort of idea of what it is to be Latina. And and it doesn't incorporate variations of class, or there's so many countries we're talking about, and different religions and people who've come from Europe. I mean, there's so much going on, and none of that is addressed. And there's this idea that it's like, so I found that very frustrating, and so the book is a kind of, that's what I was saying, it's like, glad I made it, wish I hadn't, this kind of weird thing. So I had to make it because I just was like, I cannot deal with this anymore, because I was in a lot of different, I'll just say, communities where there was literally a segregation between class. These kinds of places where people coming together because of their Latinx background, and the people who were in charge of putting the thing together, inviting people and teaching us and stuff, were the people whose parents were in the universities, you know, or had been, I mean, everyone grew up in the U.S., but, and then the people who weren't were like the people, you know, were maids or, you know, whatever, were the workers, and, you know, it was not addressed, and really traumatizing, right, to come here and get support and then have it be
Re-victimized.
Exactly, to have it sort of remarked again. And so that, again, is why it took me a very long time to decide to do this, and I'm conflicted about even having done it, because I also feel like I can't be reduced, like, I don't walk around and say I'm German, do you know? So, like, I can't be reduced to one thing. I'm all of these different things, and when, you know, I have met people who are German, Mexican background, and obviously they have nothing, like we have nothing in common, right? So to reduce me to that, or to reduce a group, so that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to actually open things up, and this is why we have not just people from different class backgrounds, but people from different countries, and the aesthetics are also very narrative, Cheryl Luna, for example, and then much more abstract, experimental on the other hand. And I really wanted to make a mark in that way to say, like, you can't just do this one thing. But like I said, I also feel...
You feel ambivalent because it's one of those things that, like, this culture kind of corners us into doing. But at the same time, I really appreciated how that came across in the introduction and also in the selection of authors. And for me, it wasn't... it did have that opening effect of, like, oh, maybe we don't have anything in common but being Latina, but the fact that we can acknowledge this shared background and some shared kind of genealogies and then see how different we are does in a way break the stereotype of the, like, that Latina is just one thing.
Right.
And I actually connected that to, well, you also talk about how, and I think you also discussed this in the previous interview with Zach, how this whole thing of, like, stepping away from the lyrical eye or looking down on the confessional, also from kind of this misogynist stance of, oh, it's too feminine, and also the, like, this kind of looking down on poetry that's too political, like, all of this, you talk about how it's part of this luxury of the privilege of being, like, the neutral subject, the white male subject, that you don't have to address these things, or that you aren't there, or that you're not, like, inevitably obsessed with these things in a way. And I agree. And then at the same time, there's in the essay The Glass Cage, Aleida Rodriguez writes about being pigeonholed as a, like, Latina writer, kind of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm just thinking of these, like, apparently contrasting ideas, because she writes about how she refuses to be relegated to a ghetto of experience and ideas by people who would keep me exiled and wounded in my work because that position seems more authentic to them, never mind what it does to me as a human being or as a writer, which is kind of what you were saying, like, we're not all this one thing. And she says the writers who lean into this contaminate the well for those of us whose concerns are more formal and spiritual, for whom it's a dedication to a craft we love as deeply as we can, with a devotion to its needs and nuances, like something alive we have been entrusted with and not a blunt instrument. So she's saying, like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about, like, maybe race or, like, the food that my grandmother cooked, or all these topics that you expect me to talk about, because I actually am interested in form, and just kind of contrasting that with what you're saying of, like, but actually we do want to talk about these things because we have to, because they're important to us. I don't think that these statements are contradictory, but I think they create kind of a complexity. I don't know what you think.
I mean, I guess to clarify a little bit, I mean, when I write anything I'm working on, I don't think, well, I'm going to write about this or I'm not going to write about this. Mm-hmm. I really just write whatever comes to me. And so, for example, my father grew up in the United States, right? And when he was a small child, I don't know what he ate, but whatever that was, I didn't grow up with that food. So if I were to write poems about, like, stereotypical ideas about what mm-hmm. Mexico is to the white middle class reader, that would be extremely racist. And my father would be so offended. It would be horrifying. If I grew up in a household where we did eat whatever kind of food, then that is what I would include, right? Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. But I think that this kind of thing that I'm talking about is kind of a deliberate use of these stereotypical symbolics, right? Mm-hmm. That then get the reader to understand that's what I am, and not me, but other mm-hmm. people, right? And that's what I'm thinking about. And the same thing with the sort of idea with the confessional or whatever. That, I mean, so to write poems that don't have any relationship to the material world is political. So, when I go to bookstores in the United States, and this is the majority of contemporary poetry, it's political. The people actually, sometimes it's literally, people are just catching Ubers or cabs or have a car, so they literally have no idea that there are actually people, unlike them in the city they live in or the suburbs or whatever. Mm-hmm. But sometimes they just don't even see it. And so it is actually political, and those are the people obviously in power. And so it's not confessional, it's just not explicit, mm-hmm. right? And so it's the same thing. And so that took me a while to realize. And so when I'm writing about whatever is in my world, it's not any different from the people who are writing about whatever sofas or couches or, I mean, I don't know what. It just, that
just happens to like get otherized because it's not trying to be apolitical in this like kind of naive way. So.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, when I lived in New York City, when I lived in Brooklyn, I was really annoyed and sort of shocked because I would go to the McNally bookstore, a bookstore in my neighborhood, sort of, and they have a huge poetry selection, and I would go there and look at the poetry, contemporary poetry, and I could go through all of them. I would go through all of them, and it was as if I forgot what war, we're always involved in a war, and there's always people, the majority of Americans are barely surviving, right, in this country, and I would look at the poems, and there was no reflection. I would get so angry, and I thought, well, how, and I thought historically in 50 or 100 years, when people look at these books, they're going to see there's this weird discrepancy, and then I realized, no, this is exactly the way it is in the United States, that people just do their own thing, and you could talk to people, you could ask people, what war are we in right now, and people wouldn't know, or do you know anyone in the military, they don't know, and so this separation is actually reflected entirely.
Yeah,
also in the art world.
Discrepancy.
Yeah, it's exactly
like it fits, it matches.
Right, and so they would look at that and say, this is exactly what it was like to live in 2026.
Like an anthropologist would be like, yes, this expresses their cultural value of alienation.
Right, exactly. And so, of course, they don't want to read poems that actually talk about these things, because then they have to see, and this is one of the things, right, you have to see the extreme violence that's necessary for this system to function, right? That's why you can't look at that.
Well, that kind of leads me right into the next question, which is, you have talked about how like you feel ambivalent toward it, like maybe this isn't something you would do today. You did this anthology when you acknowledged like a specific need for it. So my next question is, like what kind of anthology do you think is needed today if you were going to do another one? Like what would you like to anthologize around? Maybe thinking about this that we're talking about maybe, or...
Yeah, so I think that's the way I'm ambivalent about it. So I started an online journal with my husband, I don't know when, a few years ago. We started this thing because I really saw how it's really hard to get work published when you don't already have things published. Right, this is very hard, right? And so you kind of stay in this sort of ghetto and you can't get, and I could see there were so many really talented poets who were not getting work published. So I thought, I want to make a place where just random people, not random, but just anonymous people can send in work and we'll just publish it. And you don't have to know anyone, you don't have to have anything. And so that I think is more, so because an anthology again does this thing where it sort of, sorry to say this, but it sort of ghettoizes that community, right? It says you are this, and it already does this othering, right? And so what I wanted to do instead is have a kind of mix where you would have better known artists, because it also was visual art, and we had some very well-known artists and writers, and then some people who nobody ever heard of. We published somebody who wrote one phenomenal poem, and I wrote back and I said, give me more. And I was like, that's the only one I have, right? It was like amazing, yeah. So that was incredible. So we had this mix, but it's organic, right? It was holistic. So this is what we had. But that was anyway, it's hopefully going to come back, but it's a lot of work. So do you see how it's different? So it's not about sort of saying these are the people who are not getting published anywhere, because that's a weird thing to do. So instead, to include like all of the work, whether it was from famous poets or people no one had ever heard of, they're at the same level, right? They're all really great, and that does something. And this is what I'm interested in, is showing that that all of us are very complicated, and some people are championed and others aren't, and it's not always meritocracy, right? It has to do with other power structures.
Kind of just going back more like to the works themselves.
Exactly, and that's what I do in workshop too. You didn't ask about that, but it's just about the work, and so that's why I have ambivalence about some of this other stuff, because at the end of the day, my work is hopefully being published because it's good, and not because I'm XYZ. And I also, I guess I should say, and it's like a stinger, is that I am aware of the fact that if I had early on decided to identify myself as a certain
subaltern.
Something, yes, and use my father. That's what I would have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really exploit him, right, and use him, and put in whatever stuff. You'd be like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that would have done a lot of the work.
Then I would be winning all sorts of other awards and things. But again, that's just obviously that's never been a choice. That's just sort of a horror show.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand that. I have thought a lot about like how you can market certain aspects of your identity, but just how icky that is, and I totally understand what you're saying. Well, I guess to actually do that shift, like to the work itself, moving on from this anthology you participated in, kind of focusing now just on your poetry. Something that I see kind of in all of these, and from what I gleaned from the interview, also from your previous work, is kind of this methodology of collecting and like the archive, the importance of the archive. And you also shared a seminar with us last semester where you also talked a little bit more about like your methodology and your process. And so you emphasized a lot how like the quotidian, the mundane was really important as like the site of collecting kind of the raw material. And I think there's also a lot of like objects and memory in your room, in your poems, and room in your room. We'll talk about rooms later. And you also talk about like cut and paste, and I think this poem in Hotel Oblivion is just like it just sums it up in a really beautiful way. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the poem Saturday, somewhere in the middle says, why glean, why assemble, or how does accumulation keep? How does getting it all down do the same work as making? And how is the gluing of words together not unlike taking something beautiful apart? Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to ask you about like that kind of methodology of assembly and like the cutting and pasting and how it relates to memory, or to wanting to maybe ground yourself or situate yourself, or if it is in that direction, and just how like if your methodology has evolved. I guess those are a lot of questions. But.
Yeah, no, it's great, and thank you for reading that little thing. So I guess I'm just thinking. No, I will say so. So I got my training. I was trained by a poet who taught me to make these crystalline little poems, and I think you can see that in the first collection. The poems are like they're these little sort of perfect things, and it had to do a lot with getting rid of everything that was sort of messy and excess. This kind of like crystalline thing, and that's what I did until I don't remember when it was, but I was giving a talk on Tory Dent at the IIA. And I think there was something in the talk where I realized, so I was reading over my own talk, and I thought, wait, what am I talking about? And I realized that that wasn't the way. So if I'm going to talk about life, which is what I'm doing, right? We're talking about a lived life, actual material world. It's not like that, right? It's not crystalline at all, actually. Mm-hmm. And so I had this kind of destroy the master thing, right? Where the person who taught me that I sort of had on a pedestal, and that was the moment where I was like, that is not what I'm doing at all. Sort of I went through a period where I hated that person. But then, so I had to sort of, and so I was thinking about taking apart and putting it together. It's like the process of making those crystalline poems was very violent, actually. I mean, it was very sort of anorexic. I mean, I'd go through 44 drafts. And I thought, too, when I was giving this talk on Tory Dent, and the pressure, these very long lines she was writing as she was dying of AIDS, that what was being cut out was really all the stuff that should be kept in. So
like
it was all
the raw stuff. You talked about the embarrassing stuff.
Yes, exactly. All of that stuff.
The cringy parts.
Yeah, all of that
messy
stuff. That was all the stuff that was cut out, and so I thought that's actually stuff that should be in there. And so I think it's then been a slow process of like trying to figure out what that would look like. And so the archiving is part of it, and collages and all that stuff. But now I really want sort of, it's like a combination, because I really like making these kind of smashed sonnets. So they're like smashed, and there's always something that's glitched, because that's sort of what's beautiful, right? I mean, the error or the failure, the mistake is what it does something. And then I think the other thing, and this goes back to the opening of our discussion, is I didn't know about the dialectic. How could I have known about the dialectic? I didn't know anything about that sort of thing. But now that's what I'm talking about in all my workshops and all my talks, is that actually when you put two different things together, which is what I'm doing, you get a third thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what all of what we're talking about, right? So I'm not just Mexican and German, and that's ridiculous. I'm not just, it's not that just I grew up poor. I mean, so I can't be reduced to that. It's all of this stuff, but then it's still something different. And so, so that's a very long answer.
No, that's a great answer, because I literally have dialectic, Hegelian, both and, like, right after
That's
this
amazing.
question. Because I was talking about your methodology, and that was another aspect of what you shared in that seminar, like the Hegelian synthesis, and you talked about how there's like the dream state, and then there's like the madness state, and then you kind of described the habit as like the synthesis, and we'll talk more about repetition later, but I guess habit is like a form of repetition, and you explained it as like a form of reproduction through which we produce more and more levels of freedom. And this at first seems kind of counterintuitive to me, because I'm a very chaotic person and I like things spontaneous and whatever. And so I never thought of habit as a site of freedom. And I think you have a lot of that in your poetry, of like these kind of paradoxical ideas. And I'm wondering if that relates to Hegel's synthesis and the dialectic, because you have a lot of like prisons where people fear will leave. You have like habit as freedom. You have language that is silent and smoldering. You have like lines like this moment is neither now nor in the future, it is both but also something else entirely. You have ideas like one cannot notice the absence of something they do not anticipate, where like shadow is some kind of absence as presence, and like what we don't remember lives in us forever, like all these paradoxical ideas everywhere, which I love. So I wanted to ask, like, what is the role of paradox in your work, and do you conceptualize like these tensions as paradox or more as like this both and, or?
Yeah, that's great. So I think the other thing I was thinking about with that question is that I was already doing paradox, like from way back before I knew, right? So I was already doing these kinds of paradoxes. But now that I'm aware of it, that is the dialectic, right? These two different things, and then you get something new. And it isn't just one or the other, right? It isn't just, I think the thing about the prison is that Genet felt most like free when he was imprisoned, which seems so completely wild. And maybe that wasn't the entire time either, right? I'm sure at a certain point, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but things change too, and that's also a paradox, right? That's why I'm so resistant to, like I don't want to do another anthology, kind of wish I never done that, because I think every time we do that thing, it's not true, right? It's not true. We can't, because when we do reduce people, you see what happens. People get, restrained and killed, for example, or imprisoned because of their background, right? And so that's why I just, I'm always just trying to open things up instead of reducing them.
Like trying to stay in the paradox, kind of like. Yeah,
because that's the thing, is that we're all of us are very complicated. If you really get to know people, you find out that it's not just this or that, or my father, who didn't finish grammar school, he was probably the first example I had of someone who's a philosopher, though he wasn't trained, because literally, so in 2003, my gosh, that's a long time ago, he had, there was oh my gosh, sorry.
No.
I just don't know how to phrase it. It was sort of he was in a surgery that should have been just like a very rudimentary surgery, and the doctor blinded him, and he never got his sight back, and he was unable to do anything about it because it was government. So you can't sue the government. And my point is that he's very interior, very like always thinking, but now he doesn't see anything, and so, and other kinds of things too. But so I asked him recently, so what do you do all day? And he's 96 years old, and he just thinks, and he just thinks all day, and that's like, and he's always been like that, but it's more intense now because he's there's so much silence, and he's so much older, but he's just constantly, when I was growing up, we would, talk about the Catholic Church, right? We talk about politics, or we talk about the world. I mean, these huge ethical questions, right? And even without sort of the concepts or theories, he still was able to navigate, right? So
yeah, rich in our life.
yeah, so, but if somebody were to see, or just reduce them, they would just say, oh, this is
yeah, like a working class man who never went to college, so he probably has
doesn't know
really
anything.
basic ideas or something.
Yeah, exactly, and that's obviously not the case.
Yeah, no, totally. And you obviously get that, like, your intellectual capacity from
You're right, from my father,
them too.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, there's so much more to say with each question. But I guess this kind of connects to the paradoxes as well, like language and silence, and kind of what you're talking about now with your dad also made me think of it, like how like not seeing and being disconnected kind of from like part of the sensory world highlights like more the life of the mind, which seems to be different from the life of the body, and
Right.
you explore that a lot in some of these. And thinking of also silence and language, like the paradox of silence and language. You quoted Duras in the last interview as saying that writing also means not speaking and keeping silent, and so you also talk a lot about like the in-between of the what's in between the words, what's not said. And this also kind of got me thinking about the relationship between food and language, because you also talk about silence as refusal, but you also talk about anorexia as refusal, and as a refusal of like this hyperfemininity, but also a refusal of like to just like consume endlessly, I think. And so I'm just wondering, also, yeah, just to add, in Hotel Oblivion, in the poem Fragment, there's also a line that says, or how like the mind, the body ingests memory, just like how I devour everything. And so that's also how it clicked for me, like, oh, food and language. So can you talk about that relationship between food and language, and if there is one, and if it has anything to do with nourishment or with...
That's such a great question. Yeah, so I guess, it's really great. So one of the things that is so great is Lacan says that the anorexic doesn't eat nothing. Oh gosh, what is it? They eat the nothing.
I think
Yeah, I have that somewhere, yeah. And so this was really illuminating for me because that's true. And it's not just about culture, it has something else. And I guess I think that, I see the anorexic as this character that is just sort of in a suspension, like waiting for this other world to happen, right? So, and it's a resistance to the current contemporary world.
Like melancholia, maybe also like what you, like when you talk about this character who just like refuses to be in the wedding and all.
Right. Yeah, there might be something there, but then it's also interesting with language because, so for Lacan, language is what forms us. And so your question is so great too, because then it made me think, so the anorexic, so in the US, the contemporary anorexic is trying to escape all these confines, all the symbolics that have been put, like you're this daughter, you're this, you're all of these things. And really when the anorexic sort of withers away, they're not any of that anymore, right? It's so interesting. So it really is almost like a resistance to language, right? Which is interesting. Or the way that language names and destroys, right? So like, I don't want to be that. But they really are this peripheral character, right? They're just, that's why I keep thinking like in stasis, because they're not anything new. And the very strange thing too, and so anorexia is really also very weird, because I always thought anorexia was its own thing, but so I'm Lacanian, so it's a symptom, right? So there are people who are in a state of psychosis who don't eat, and they're anorexic. But when I think of anorexia, I think of, the deliberate decision not to eat, like the hunger artist sort of. It's a different thing. Oh no, and I just lost my thought, but it will come back.
Yeah, like there's this kind of rejection of excess, maybe like the excess of like.
Yeah, but I also want to say the thing about devouring. That's what I was going to say. But when when I sit down and I talk to one after another anorexic who's in that state, like 85 pounds, 75 pounds, like whatever, they're exactly the same. It's very strange what happens.
They
this kind
achieve
of
that like erasure of identity.
Yeah, but not just the. It's interesting. It's not just the body, and it's not just that the mind is empty, because the mind becomes empty. Same things. I mean, not literally, but there's a very strange thing that happens, and I don't probably think I'll ever develop anything with that. But it's, but that's why it's like they're reduced to this sort of like holding zone, right, until something else. But unfortunately, usually there's not another else, and so yeah, it's just death. Yeah.
And now that you've mentioned that, I can like the reduction of space, like that makes me think of rooms in prisons, which are so present in your work as well. Which was my next question, because like obviously Hotel Oblivion there's a lot of rooms, hotel.
So great.
And there's also a lot of a hotel is like the kind of quintessential like domestic space that's not a home, and it's just the room. And then in that poem is where you also talk a lot about Jeanette in prisons. So I'm thinking about like that in connection to what we're just talking about, like of silence and anorexia. And so am I like right in seeing a connection between the enclosure of a room and the enclosure of the prison explored as settings that are not like experienced in the negative and suffocating way that you'd expect, but sometimes are a site of relief or even like self-knowledge and self-exploration? And is it related to anorexia and the desire to be smaller, and to the idea of refusal?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the thing with the hotels, the hotel rooms, so one chooses freely to stay. I mean, in my world, right? One chooses freely to stay in a hotel, and you can move from room to room. So that's important, right? Choice. And
not in a prison.
Yes, no. So I think that's really important, and even the anorexic has made this decision. So I think the determination is really important. And I was thinking about, oh gosh, I forgot her name, but so I forgot. It's like the hug machine for the autistic. Temple Grandin, right, created this thing because she, there's this need to be in a space, like to be sort of compressed. It's what is comforting, right? And so there's something about that too, right? This kind of a
like being in a cocoon kind.
Yes, exactly. So there's something about that. But this is not the same. And actually, my current philosophical project is on. It's on. Whole big thing, but it's looking at how asylums never were shut. So to my horror, I found out that in Germany there are still asylums. People are still held in solitary confinement. People who are held in a psychiatric institution are held in solitary confinement, I discovered, for 3.5 months or longer without escape. And this seems completely like, how could this happen? But in fact, it does happen. There are these laws that protect the doctors and the government. They're in place to protect the patient, but that's not what they're there for. They're actually there to protect the doctors and the state. And so that is I just wanted to say that is not. So you might decide, I'm a visual artist, I'm a writer, I'm going to be in this space, I'm going to close the door and be alone, and that gives me freedom. But when it is not determined and it's used as a form of punishment, this has to do with old ideas of the mentally ill, however you want to call it, being criminals. And this is actually how they're allowed to do it. It's because they say that the patient may one day be a danger to themselves or someone else. Not now. Like sometime. I mean, couldn't we all, right? And that's why they can be held in solitary confinement. So it's important to sort of separate, and that's where the Genet gets very interesting, and that's why I say I'm sure that it's a moving thing, that it wasn't, like he didn't live in prison forever, right? It's like a thing.
Yeah, and it's great that you point out that distinction, because I was focusing more on the connections, but that's a really important distinction, and just... Yeah, it's a really important distinction, but I do think there is, at least in this book, a very striking and generative idea of that made me see that in a different way. And I think I've also, when I did a queer and feminist prison studies class, I do remember reading like some kind of med studies, like articles where some people described also some, like obviously asylums are horrible, but where there was like a sense of, well, at least here, like I found people like me, or like I didn't have to worry about like existing or something, like there was, so I do think there is space for exploring the different ways in which people can at least temporarily feel some kind of relief in confinement. And I think that was something that I appreciated for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is that the hotels are like, they're these sort of no-way zones. I forgot what they're actually called, but I've written about them, but I forgot. But like airports, right? And I really love these spaces because they're spaces that are in public, but they're aside from like the real world, and so like a mall can be like that, you know, these and hotels are like that, so these kinds of no spaces or in between spaces, but prisons and asylums are something separate. But I just want to say too that you are right, that there is this, it's paradox, right, that being enclosed can be very freeing, but it can also be detrimental. It can destroy a person, but it has to do with determination. Like when I make a decision to go into a closed cell for a month so that I can paint a painting by myself, that's totally different than being put in as a form of punishment.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's an important nuance to not like say that, or to not have it be used as an argument like in favor of imprisoning people or something. And well, to start to go towards our conclusion, I wanted to touch on your new collection, Sweet Repetition, and my last two kind of questions, because sometimes I ask more than one in the question, is precisely about the two words that from the title. So first, I have to ask about the word sweet, because looking at your other poems, I mean, this is obviously in the title, but I noticed how you use the word sweet a lot in other poems you did before, and it always appears in ways, like, again, paradoxical that I wouldn't expect. Like, some examples from different poems, you write about a sweet kind of violence in Hotel Oblivion, a sweet smell of prison water in Hotel Woods, the sweet song of poverty, the sweet and filthy water in Dregs. So can you tell us, like, how do you notice that?
That's so great. No, I hadn't.
What's your relationship with the word sweet in this?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. These questions are so good because I didn't notice them. It's like being in a workshop. But so this comes out of, or came out of my dissertation, and so for both Lacanian, Freudian psychoanalysis, right, it's all about, and Hegel, right, so repetition is not great, right, so we repeat things that we haven't worked through, so that's how we get stuck, right, but also, you see that in our culture and capitalism, everything is just a repetition of the same thing. It's the same music, the same, just the same thing over and over. And so repetition is really awful. And it's like habit that gets stuck. I mean, in my dissertation, I actually call it capitalist habit. So habit actually, capitalism takes the Hegelian concept of habit, which can create freedom, and makes this kind of stuck kind of thing. So we're all sort of stuck, and it's like we're all stuck in this.
Like in a loop.
Yes, exactly, and we can't get out, right? So this is, so you're right that it's actually repetition is not good, but the only way out is actually a form of repetition, right? It's actually another form of repetition, and so that's what the sweet repetition is. So the collection is all about different forms of repetition and interruption, and so that's the thing, is there has to be a kind of an interruption that changes the repetition. Otherwise, all you have is these like crazy loops that never move. And so that's what so this collection is structural. So it's all about the repetitions with the interruptions and trying to create like a rupture in repetition. And so this is different than the other ones because, like I said, it's all it's structural. I mean, the other ones are too, but this is primarily that. And that's why it's sweet repetition, because it's the hope that I can create a repetition that changes
sweet
repetition.
Instead of icky.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what the aim was, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just noticed, I do feel like first reading this and then reading those, like, this really set me up for, like, pattern recognition because there's so much repetition. And
Right.
I also read this first for my workshop with Joyelle and did, like, a presentation on it. And I counted, like, the repetitions of all of these
That's
words
amazing,
because
yeah.
I was, like, I got into this very, like, detective-y mode of reading. And so that's why I think this sweet, like, just kept sticking out for me when I went back to your other books. And I see so much of the things you explore here in all of the work. And so I see what you mean about it being structural, because it feels like it's almost like a reshuffling of a lot of things. And so I guess that takes us to the repetition part. Like, this has been a recurring interest of yours for a long time. In the interview 9 years ago, you also talked about this. You have, like, several poems with the same title, not just here. You were already doing that. There's so many motifs, words, even whole lines, like, that within the collection, like, you kind of reformulate or echo and that come up in different poems. Like, even in guidebooks for the dead, there's so many, like, the word drag comes up a lot, which is, like, echoing kind of the previous collection. So there's all this, like, intertextuality within your work as well, and that, I think, connects to repetition. And then you have a lot of poems that, like, directly allude to repetition from before, like Kingdom of Dirt, Fatigue Empire, Dark Register. And in the previous interview, you talked about how repetition creates accumulation, but it is also negation. Like, you say it once, and then saying it again kind of denies it in a way. And also in Disquieting Essays on Silence, you wrote that repetition conveys what cannot otherwise be relayed. This stuttering performs not knowing and holds open the space, resisting the reductive binary that results from knowing. And so I guess, like, this poetics of not knowing as a non-commodifiable mode, and, like, kind of as something that goes against these binaries and these capitalist values. Would you say this is one of the political dimensions of your work, in some sense?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I think that's sure, it's one of them, I guess. But I think yeah, I mean, so the thing about I'm just not sure what to say, because you just said it all so beautifully. But just that it's so funny to hear you quote myself from Disquieting, because I was saying things that I'm saying now and I didn't know I was already. And I think that's sort of a pattern. What we were first talking about is I sort of holistically or organically knew certain things, but I didn't have a theory for it. So the thing about repetition being exactly what I said in Disquieting. I mean, this is Freud, right? This is why, like, the anorexic keeps not eating, is because there's something that symptom is saying, and that's the thing, right? The symptom is a language. There's something that the symptom is saying, but they can't get it yet. And so that's the thing, that they have to get the language, and that's what psychoanalysis does, and then you're not anorexic anymore. But it is, I guess I would say it is political, because I feel like in our society, everyone knows everything already. And it's very difficult to teach a workshop when everyone already knows everything already, for example, or to teach. And everyone can't know everything. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? But this is something, I guess it's a kind of perversion, right? So if you know something, that actually short-circuits the ability to know anything, right? If you think you know everything, and so with psychoanalysis and Hegel, the whole idea is that in order to enter anything, I mean, Hegel wrote The Phenomenology of Spirit. That whole book is about, like, in order to learn anything, you have to undo everything you knew. That's the whole book, right? But he does that elsewhere too. You have to really, really enter everything with whatever I know, I'm just going to put to the side, and then you can learn things. And it's so important, and it also is really important too. I'm thinking again about the workshop, and you have people. I'm not talking about my workshop, right? Just in general, right?
Disclaimer.
Yeah, I'm not talking about my people, just in general, right? So you have people from different backgrounds. They identify differently. They come from different class backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, religion, everything, right? Everyone knows different things. And so the only way we're going to be able to read someone else's work with open eyes is to set aside everything I know. Otherwise, you're going to workshop and you're going to say, I don't like this.
Yeah, no.
Or I don't relate. And then that's actually very violent, right? So this is one of the, I'm going back to how I do the workshop, is that you just talk about the work, and then it already takes care of, like, the setting aside, because all of your personal aesthetics just don't matter, right? And so, so I guess you didn't ask me this, a lot of my teaching, undergrad and grad, I have all these kind of little prompts or tools that I use that just sort of short circuit knowing, and people, so I don't have to get into the whole thing about that, it just already does that.
You put them in that, like, state, kind of, like...
Yeah, so I have all these prompts that I give the undergrads, because I think grad students won't do it, but the undergrads will do it, and it's so amazing. I have all these prompts that allow them, so like Mad Libs or after poems, or have them do not really ekphrasis, but they'll look at a painting and write whatever they see, and so it really is just like almost like stupid. You're just doing this very rudimentary thing, but when we do very rudimentary or mechanical movements that frees the mind, and then the unconscious comes in, and then the most amazing work enters. And so, like, that short circuits me having to give, like, a very long lecture on this whole thing, and they just access the thing immediately. It's amazing.
Instead of telling, you just show them, right?
Exactly.
And I do think that's political, because it goes beyond, like, the workshop space, or even talking about artistic creations, like just assuming that you don't know what the person's life is like. It just helps, like, just to have any kind of dialogue about, like, just practical life things. And so that's what I think is really political, in a sense that, like, is not the typical way that we think of, like, the way that art can be political, I guess. And I guess, like, we're coming up on time, even though I could keep talking to you, and, like, I anticipated, but there's so much more to cover. But I just wanted to ask you if you would be willing to read a poem or two just to conclude, maybe from your new collection.
Oh, I actually don't think I can, because I can't see anything. Not like I'm not blind, but I need reading glasses, and I literally didn't bring.
Is there one you know by heart?
No, I don't. Isn't that terrible?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, maybe I can read it just so that the audience gets a taste.
Yeah, you can just pick whichever one. Yeah, I thought of it, and then I didn't bring them with me, so.
Oh, well, it's a shame, but I mean, people can also look for your readings your recent reading in the YouTube of the Creative Writing Program, where they can hear you reading. I'm going to read this really short one called Fragment Dora, because it has a loop in it, and I just love it, and I love how it ends. So this is Fragment Dora, and it goes, Dora, on her back, on the soft leather couch, dreaming annihilation. Circuitous, the drive and its liquid, libidinous loop, looping back endlessly to its ruinous and glorious origin. So I guess we'll end with that, and thank you so much for being here. This was a delightful talk, and hopefully we can continue talking about some of these things while we're both still here.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you.